Good morning. I want to welcome everyone to this year's Youth Fall Summit. I'm Asia Harris, Youth Programs Manager at the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center in Cincinnati, Ohio. And we have an awesome group of panelists this morning. So I'm going to give a little background on some of the folks that we have here, and then I'm going to let our youth introduce themselves. So this morning we have Dr. Kate Clifford Larsen, and give me just a moment, you all. Dr. Kate Clifford Larsen is a New York Times and Wall Street Journal bestselling author of critically acclaimed biographies, Bound for Promised Land, Harriet Tubman, Portrait of an American Hero, Rosemary, the Hidden Kennedy Daughter, and the assassin's accomplice, Mary Surratt in the Plot to Kill Abraham Lincoln. Her latest work, Walk With Me, a biography of Fannie Lou Hamer, tells the remarkable story of one of America's most important civil rights leaders of the 20th century. Praised for her research and insights as a biographer, as a biographer, Larsen digs deep into her subject's history, uncovering family roots, personal life, and recenters their stories in the context of their times for modern readers. An award-winning consultant for feature film scripts, documentaries, museum exhibits, and public history initiatives, Larsen is frequently interviewed by national and international media outlets, and Dr. Larsen is a Brandeis University Women's Study Research Center visiting scholar. So welcome, Dr. Larsen, this morning. Our next panelist that we have with us is Ms. Sagan March. And give me just a moment, you all. Ms. March is a content manager and storyteller of marketing at Greater Cincinnati Foundation. Sagan is responsible for developing and executing strategic, creative, digital content to Greater Cincinnati Foundation's story and advances community leadership, work, and commitment to addressing equity and inclusion issues. She crafts the bi-monthly newsletter, creates all internal and external content for Greater Cincinnati Foundation, and produces multimedia video community projects for social platforms. Her passion for telling unique community stories and using data to highlight real issues has taken her many places in journalism. Sagan was a breaking news reporter at the Cincinnati Enquirer before joining Greater Cincinnati Foundation in January of 2021. Sagan is a 2015 graduate of Indiana University with a Bachelor's of Arts in Broadcast Journalism and a minor in sociology. While completing her master's degree in nonprofit administration and business marketing at Louisiana State University, Sagan served as the community engagement liaison at Step Forward, a children's nonprofit focused on literacy and childhood development. So I'm very excited for this panel this morning, and now we will let our youth introduce themselves.
I can go first.
Okay.
Awesome. My name is Annie Udosin. I'm a senior at Fairfield High School, and I am really excited to be here today and just be a part of this discussion about increasing representation in media and also in STEM.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Zoe McNeil. I'm a senior at Fairfield High School, and I'm so glad I got the opportunity to be on this panel this morning. I'm really excited to have a very great conversation with all of you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Anastasia Yankson. I'm also a senior at Fairfield High School, and I'm really excited to speak with everyone today.
Hi, my name is Kendall Roberts-Rosser. I'm a junior at Fairfield High School, and I'm super excited to hear all the different discussions we have today.
Thank you. Is that all of our students? Okay, so this morning we're just going to jump right into the conversation. So Sagan, I am a little interested in so equity, representation. You all really try to speak for marginalized communities or marginalized demographics in our community. So what role would you say the media has? And actually, before we get started, you all, I'm forgetting a great segment. So we're going to be having some singing this morning. Zoe McNeil is going to sing a song for us. Then we're going to get into our segment. So Zoe, actually, Dr. Larsen, she's going to be singing a song that was on the Harriet film. And Zoe, whenever you are ready, you can take us away.
Alrighty, thank you. I'm going to be singing Stand Up by Cynthia Reno. Acapella. That's all I know. I've been walking with my face turned to the sun. Weight on my shoulders, a bullet in my gun. Oh, I got eyes in the back of my head, just in case I have to run. I do what I can when I can, while I can for my people. As the clouds roll back and the stars fill the night, that's when I'm gonna stand up, take my people with me. Together we are going to a brand new home. Far across the river, do you hear freedom calling? Calling me to answer, gonna keep on keeping on. I can feel it in my bones. Early in the morning, before the sun begins to shine, we're gonna start moving towards that separating line. I'm wading through muddy water. You know I gotta make up mind. And I don't mind if I lose any blood on the way to salvation. And I'll fight with the strength that I got until I die. So I'm gonna stand up, take my people with me. Together we are going to a brand new home. Far across the river, can you hear freedom calling? Calling me to answer, gonna keep on keeping on. And I know what's around the bend. It might be hard to face 'cause I'm alone. And I just might fail, but at least I tried. Just the stars fill up the sky. Stand up, take my people with me. Together we are going to a brand new home. Far across the river, can you hear freedom calling? Calling me to answer, gonna keep on keeping on. I'm gonna stand up, take my people with me. Together we're going to a brand new home. Far across the river, I hear freedom calling, calling me to answer. Gonna keep on keeping on. I can feel it in my bones. I go to prepare a place for you. I go to prepare a place for you. I go to prepare a place for you. I go to prepare a place for you.
Thank you, Zoe. So that is a wonderful way to get our panel started. I feel like that could also, really set a tone for the change and this representation that we're trying to create here, to stand up for what we believe in and what we think needs to be done in our community. So getting back to our initial question for Sagan, this is, what does the role media have in social, excuse me, what role does the media have in racial healing and providing spaces for young people to share their experiences?
Well, that question is, that's a very good question. I would have to say there's just so many different dynamics to it. I came into journalism at a fairly young age, and media representation for marginalized communities and Black and Brown communities wasn't as it is today. And I would say that 2020 was a big year for media as far as getting more young adults in there, covering protests, which the younger adults, I was in the middle of all of that. So I was able to watch high school students and college students really take that life of its own. And talking to them through the media was an amazing experience for me. One thing I could say is, you know, when crime happens, the Cincinnati Enquirer actually stopped publishing mugshots of Black men and Black women. That way we didn't keep pushing the narrative. That was a big push that the Black journalists in the newsroom petitioned for, and they were like, fine, we'll do it. So I can tell from the media perspective that the narrative is kind of shifting. And now that they're hiring more Black and Brown individuals for leadership roles and like publishing roles and things like that, the narrative is going to change, right? Because the gatekeepers at the top aren't who they used to be. So I see it moving forward. There's just more opportunities. And now that there's more opportunities for Black journalists and editors and executive editors and publishers and authors, it just feels like now we can control who we're interviewing, what we're talking about, and making sure that we're getting all sides of it. And coming from the Greater Cincinnati Foundation, we're so focused on racial equity and the importance behind it, and really getting into the community and showing, hey, we're here for you. And we want to tell your stories, because what better way to know what's happening in the community than to actually go in that community. And data really tells us where we should be going. And there's so many stories in data. So I, as a journalist, I've always told people, most of my stories I find in data. And then you have to humanize that data, right? Because people don't want to read a spreadsheet about what's happening. They want to go into the community and I'm like, wow, I've never knew this was happening. You could talk about poverty and maternal health and all these different things, but if you can't relate or humanize with it, it's kind of hard to be able to make a change in that sector and other sectors. So sorry, I know that's probably quite long-winded, but it's I'm really proud where the media is going as far as journalism platform for telling Black and Brown stories and other marginalized communities. And I really feel like there was a big push right after George Floyd and everything. People were like, hold up, like this is an issue. And it wasn't covered as much. And while I think that we're out here covering these issues, I think it's also can be traumatizing in a sense as well to Black culture. But that's journalism though. It's not, it cannot be, sometimes it's a friendly profession and sometimes it's not. Someone's always gonna be upset about what you're covering. And some people aren't ready for that, but I really see the change in it. And I see that young adults are leading the movements, the protests, the petitions online, things like that. And that is so inspirational. And I know when I was your age, we cared about these things, but it wasn't as prominent. It wasn't in the media as what we weren't kind of inspired to get more involved in these issues. So to see these issues arise and that young adults now have this opportunity to step up and speak their mind and speak their truth, I think that's great, right? Because it's intergenerational. We all learn from each other, no matter what age it is. And I really want you all to take that you learn from them, they learn from you. And I really believe your generation is very open-minded and is the future. And I'm so excited. I don't know where journalism is going to be or any media in 5 years. I'm hoping on the same upward path. But representation has been really, really great. In some media outlets, I can't speak for all, right? I can speak for more local affiliates. I can't speak for the national brands, right? Because there's still gatekeepers at the top that have nothing to do with these communities. But I can speak for local journalism and statewide journalism papers and say that they're really helping change that narrative and being more sensitive to these communities, which is very critical, and eliminating stereotypes and things like that. So I hope that answers your question. It's there's a lot that goes on with that.
Of course.
Yeah.
It does. Actually leads me into another question that I have for you. And, you know, you kind of answered it a little bit, but, you know, in order for these stories that we're talking about, excuse me, in order for these stories that we're talking about to make it to the forefront, how can people get involved and what do we have to do to create that awareness? You know, you talked about petitions and students just, you know, being more active in media and protests. So what, you know, what can they do?
Well, I'd say for starters, I think social media has really taken off. It is the biggest platform, I think, for reaching larger audiences. I did not have that. We started off with MySpace and a little bit of Facebook on the tail end. So a lot of these issues and this commentary was not accessible at that time. So I would say maybe like if there's a story in your community, just start writing or blogging and tag these other journalists, or you can find them on Instagram, Twitter, all of these platforms, and start sharing your stories and your narratives and blogging about what you're seeing in your community. I think that's like really, really a big deal because not all neighborhoods and communities are the same. While the dynamics might be the same because of micro and macro issues, every community is different. So I would say if you have a story idea, reach out to your media affiliates. There are a lot of journalists that want to take a deep dive. They want to do these feature stories. And to be positive about it, right? Because change doesn't happen overnight. It is very much a marathon. So you have to be patient, you have to be diligent, and you have to be open-minded to what could come from it. I think there's a lot of chances right now, even to be a young author. I think that's an amazing thing. And I believe that your voice matters and you should continue to use that voice right now to inspire other people and to not get caught up in the whirlwind of other things. Like you can be an influencer in a different way. And I really can't wait to see what you all do. And that would be my best bet. Maybe go down, sit down with a journalist, right? Reach out and find a mentor and just kind of talk to them a little bit. They're so easygoing. And, you could even join the National Association of Black Journalists, the Greater Cincinnati chapter, if you want to meet more journalists like that. And if you're interested in that field, whether that's public relations or journalism or anything like that, broadcast, print, and written formats, you could also go to one of their meetings as well and kind of get to network and to know them because they're looking for these stories. As a former journalist, it's very hard to be everywhere at one time. You think you're working on a story, but then something crazy happens and you have to, take off to somewhere else. So network is so important. That's the best thing I can tell you all that I wish you would have told me. When I was a senior in high school, I didn't start doing it until college. But now you have so many opportunities to connect with people outside of a yellow phone book. So take advantage of those opportunities and tell those stories. And I think you'll go a long way with that, for sure.
Thank you. So that leads us into our student segment in a sort. So I have asked students to prepare some questions for our leading panelists because I really want to know, what are you all thinking? What's your perspectives? What's your curiosity? So I know some of our students had questions for Dr. Larsen and Chelsea and Sagan. So let's get some of our youth questions in this morning. Let's start off with a question for Dr. Larsen. Annie?
I have a question for Dr. Larsen. So I know you worked on the Harriet film, and I was wondering, do you think historical films tend to sugarcoat what actually took place?
I do think that historical films can sugarcoat what actually took place. And I know with the Harriet film, they were trying to walk that fine line of entertainment. It's Hollywood. We have to accept that entertainment. They're there to inform and have a good film and make money, and also to tell the truth without it being so dark that people wouldn't want to go see the film. And I think with the Harriet movie, they started with a script that was written in 1993. So it was very outdated. It hadn't kept pace with the way we talk about slavery and enslave people's lives. It was very stereotypical. And so that's why they brought me in, and we worked together on it to humanize it and make it about Harriet Tubman, but also a contemporary woman that people today could identify with, because that's the whole point. We all have to see Harriet Tubman as a human being, a daughter, a wife, a friend, someone who had girlfriends, and who had aspirations and could be funny. And so films are now, I think, starting to do that, particularly for that time period of before the Civil War and the treatment of enslaved people. We have to make it accessible, because we all want people to know this history, but we can't make it so that they're like, they won't have patience for it. And we have to honor the subjects of those movies. They're real people, and let's give them the full lives that they deserve to be seen.
Thank you. So I know that one of the students sent me a question regarding trauma and how do we create stories around this era of history. So I can't remember exactly who, but whoever had that question, if you could raise it for Dr. Larsen.
Yeah, so my question was, we've seen like an increasing amount of historical films in Hollywood in general, especially concerning like African Americans. So how do producers and writers make sure that like events concerning trauma is presented accurately?
So as I said before, it is a fine line that they try to walk to be authentic. Like the movie 12 Years a Slave, they stuck very, very close to the actual book. They didn't vary from it very much. And it was so authentically told. And audiences are leery of watching the violence. I mean, we all, it's hard to watch violence. So there is a conscious effort on how do you find the balance. And I think for the Harriet movie, I think they did that because they let Tubman be a real woman who had love and pain and humor and courage and brilliance, and they made her a full person. So the violence was not the totality of her story. The trauma was not the totality of her story. And that can be applied to any historical character, and even contemporary films today. And I also think that sometimes we as viewers, we've become desensitized to the violence. So what purpose does so much violence in a film do for us? I'm not so sure. So filling out those characters and the storylines to make them real human beings that we feel empathy for or an affection for, that we can relate to, that's really a goal for many directors and scriptwriters in Hollywood today. And we have to go and see those films, because if we go and see them, pay the money to see them, then they will make more of those good films that we feel represent a truth, whether it's accurate history or not, but it's a truth. We have to support them. We really do.
I have a question to follow up with that. So, and actually, I'm also going to get back to Sagan as well to talk about the future of media. So I'll let you think about it, in the time being. What does the future of media look like? So do you feel like Hollywood is making that shift to include these historical eras? And what difference does it make for these young people to be seeing these stories on TV?
So I think Hollywood is making the effort, and there's so many platforms now for productions, and there are just so many TV network stations and online, and Apple TV and Amazon, all that. So there are so many places now where the scriptwriters can now try to pitch their work, and the producers and directors can pitch it. So that's very different than when I grew up, and we had 3 TV stations and maybe 1 cable station. So nothing was happening back then. So you all have great opportunities to write scripts and to, push the narratives that you want to see. I also, as a historian, I'm frustrated with my profession, and historians today are getting better at it, but we often write for each other and not for the public. And the public isn't interested in some of the, the way historians can write. So we need to write better product so that people will read it, because there's a basic historical illiteracy in this country. And we need to repair that, because we are reliving historical mistakes and we shouldn't be. And if we all were historically literate, then things hopefully would be different today. But I'm very, very hopeful. I'm very hopeful.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'm going to take a question for Chelsea. So this first question is pretty simple, but I think that it can be, telling for young people who are waiting to go into that next level, college, university, career. So what made you choose your major? And if you would like to maybe remind us, what is your major?
Yeah, hi everybody. It's good to be here. So I'm a student at Miami University. I'm graduating here in a month. I came into the university with a historical focus. I know I wanted to do something historical. I wasn't quite sure what. I had the narratives of the proud white man history, and those have been projected throughout my entire high school career and before that, and in movies and everyday life. That's just what I saw. So I thought that's what I wanted to do. I thought that's what I needed to perpetuate, is keep giving these stories. It wasn't until my sophomore year that I took a class on women's history, and we really sat down and we were thinking about commemorations and who we think to commemorate and why that matters. And, I was just thinking, like, looking around at the buildings here at Miami, how many of them were named after white men? How many of them were named after men? So if you take away these identities, it gets fewer and fewer. Women of color not represented equally, or how they should be represented in our community for what they have done for our communities. So I kind of started focusing on this intersection of gender and race. Especially, I do also like to focus on sexuality too, because I feel like that's a huge component of identity that is often lost in historical narratives. So yeah, that really fueled my historical journey to start looking at these people who have been virtually forgotten by the history books on account of their skin color, their identity, different factors that shouldn't matter. So I really have that to thank. I have a professor here, Professor Hamlin, Dr. Hamlin. She works with me. She's a gender, sex, and education focus, and she's really guided me to help share these stories that have been written out of the narrative.
Thank you. So you mentioned commemoration. I wanted to kind of jump back to that. So for your demographic, how do you feel like we can commemorate these figures that you're learning about? And what do you see for them being memorialized in the future? I know that you maybe did not know, that would be a question, but I'm very curious.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I did a project with that class actually, where we took something on campus and we did a proposal for how we would change it to be more inclusive and be more honest. And here at Miami, we have this thing called the Cradle of Coaches, which is all these men who led the sports industry here. And doing some research, I was able to find these incredible women who actually were the forefront of starting women's sports in Ohio in general, who we don't talk about. And they were here at Miami, and they ended up leading teams to, I think it was the MAC championships is what it is here. And so I was like, if we kind of rock this cradle and we change it and have a whole billboard of women, how does that change how I see myself and how other women see ourselves? What if we get women of color to be represented on these billboards for their amazing feats that they were able to accomplish? I feel like moralizations, there has been a move towards being more inclusive and being more respectful of the amazing things that people of minorities have been able to accomplish, especially under the restrictions of their status. So I just think that needs to continue. I think it is continuing. As Dr. Larsen said, with the media, we see this move towards being representative of the people who are the stories that we want to see and who we are. in the media today. But I think there's always room for improvement, and that's really part of my mission, is to keep this movement going. We have momentum right now, let's keep it going.
Thank you. So leading into our next question, I wanted to ask this for Segun. So do you see a difference based off of data and how people's trust increases across industries when leadership reflects the people it's serving, whether that be in journalism, when you're out in the field, you know, in communities? What do you see that makes people feel trusted and like they can tell their stories so that someone can go speak for them or represent them? You're muted.
I'm sorry about that. Well, what I can say first and foremost is that when you go into these communities, you have to come as is, right? Don't come in heels and things like that. You want to be seen as easygoing, someone that's worth trusting. You know, when I was in reporting, I used to keep all kinds of shoes and tennis shoes and like jeans, because you just never know where you're going to go. And perception is really everything, and first impressions and how people engage with you is a really, really big deal. But I can say that when people of color and marginalized communities are put in these positions of power, great things happen. New conversations emerge. Like Dr. Larsen said, talking about humanizing Harriet, right? She had friends and family, and showing not just her strength, but also things that empowered her as she moved through her life. These things are really, really important. And that's just another piece of humanizing everyday folks. And that's what's really, really important. And it's data has stated, even in the education sector, having more Black teachers, Black and brown teachers in urban schools and things like that. When you have someone that's relatable and is a great positive influence for you and to you, students tend to do better. And I think that just happens across all sectors. And one thing I can say, and I'll pop back into your media question as well about the future of it for time's sake. I can definitely say that getting more representation in all of these sectors, especially in leadership of power, is going to take our country so much further instead of negating them and lifting them up from the curb. I think that's very, very important. One thing we saw with All In Cincinnati last year, amidst all of the crises that were happening and things we were seeing on television, the conversation around race and equity really became at the forefront, and more people became more comfortable talking about that. We had the Cincinnati Day of Racial Healing, and more than 1,500 people got on a virtual call to talk about these things. So putting these people in power are making people more comfortable to have these awkward taboo conversations that we usually only have in intimate settings with, whether that's friends or family. And now people can talk about it in a larger platform and within their organizations, and focusing on DEI and things like that. So I think it's really great, just from a data standpoint, just having anyone that reflects you in a higher position. And I think it's really, really important in the education sector as well. Even having principals that are from diverse backgrounds, who are hire diverse teachers. Like, it all funnels downhill from the top down when we talk about things like this. But a lot of the times those stories and those people that are really going to make a difference come from the bottom up. I always say in journalism, we always rush to talk to CEOs, but it's the janitors. It's the people that are not at the top that have the most stories to tell. And we should work on humanizing them as well, as we think about things and relating to them and talking to them, because they are people. So that's really important. I can say that you have to have more representation in all of these sectors, especially journalism, about what stories we can tell. I've interned and worked in newsrooms where they don't want you to tell Black stories or stories about poverty and things like that. There's taboo around it. And you have to fight to want to do those stories. And that's kind of why I got into journalism, because I've always loved data. And I said, man, no one's telling stories about the Black community or the education sector of the Black community. And when I was reporting in Louisiana, I was an investigative education reporter, and I was from Indiana. I was not a Southern girl. So I came down and I was like, oh my gosh, this is terrible. This is so terrible how these students have hand-me-down textbooks, but right across the tracks, they have modern schools that look like ITT and Ivy Tech campuses, you know, and things like that. So it's really disheartening to go into communities and not feel something. I mean, I felt so overwhelmed when I lived in Louisiana because it was saddening and they didn't have the right people at the top to speak on those students' behalf. So doing those stories and getting out there and looking at that data and putting it in place is so important, you guys, because it challenges the status quo. And this is what it's all about across all mediums, is challenging the status quo and making people uncomfortable on where they're at, and maybe encouraging them to talk about and talk to other people that may not look like them. Okay, so as far as the future of media, I think we're on an upward path. I think from the authors, I mean, we also have so many more children's books that are written by Black authors to inspire, you know, Black hair, Black love. That is so unique to me, something I didn't have growing up. And even more schools are putting Black authors in those, you know, in the libraries and things like that. So having that representation is important, because authors and books, they're all media in a sense, right? How we construct it is the medium of it. So future media, I think it's great. I think it's challenging the status quo. I think it's putting people on alert. And I think it's holding people, government entities and individuals and corporations accountable. And I think the youth are really leading that. So yeah, it's, I don't know what's going to happen with media, but I think we're on a really good trend with it. And like I said, it has the power to inspire people to have these wonderful conversations. I was very impressed to hear 1,500 people came to that virtual event and were willing to listen to other people's lived experiences. That may have not happened a few years ago. It was very taboo to talk about their discriminatory things they face and things like that. So I think it has the power for conversation, for real conversations.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for that great response. So how can young people, I mean, I would imagine that maybe the same way as adults, but how can young people get involved with that work? You talk about 1,500 people on a, you know, community-based conversation. We see now we have a wonderful, brilliant youth, you know, here. They're going to take back some of this information to their, you know, fellow students, but how do they do it? Where do they start? And do you see new conversations that young people are having that you maybe didn't see in your generation, or Dr. Larsen, maybe in your generation? Do you see young women, young men doing things that they haven't previously necessarily done, or just having those new talks for both of you all?
Well, I'm seeing a huge difference from when I grew up, and the world, I think young people are experiencing a far different world than the world that I grew up in. And my world was much more segregated. And I think, you know, the world today is much more diverse, and young people are so much more, I don't know, they seem so mature to me compared to when I was young. It's true. And I'd like to say that the way we look at people and difference today is light years from when I grew up. You know, to bring this a little bit back to Harriet Tubman, you know, she could not read or write letters, but she could read a landscape. She could read the night sky. She could read, you know, the water, the fields, the woods, she could read people. Those are literacies. And I remember giving a talk to a group of students in Auburn, New York, who live in the town that Tubman spent the last 50 years of her life. And this 6th grade girl came up to me after the talk, and she said she just loved Harriet Tubman. Harriet Tubman inspires her because this girl, 6th grader, has tremendous learning disabilities, and it's difficult for her to read, but she too knows she has literacies, and she can be strong and smart like Harriet Tubman, even though she cannot read or write. So these things are powerful, and we have to remember that even people with disabilities like Harriet Tubman, physical and learning, that they can move a community. They can make change in the world. And I see so many young people today that are going to change our world for the better. I'm hopeful. I'm like Shagan right now. I feel hopeful for the future.
Thank you. Thank you. So my next question, we're going to lead into a question about Sagan. If you didn't have any comments right now, I want to talk to you. You know, we talked about change makers and brilliance. Brielle, welcome to the panel this morning. We saw you hopped on with us. If you'd like to introduce yourself real quick, then we'll get into the next question. Well, I said your name, but you know.
Sorry. Yeah, hi, my name is Brielle and I'm a senior and I'm very excited to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you. So this next question, when you all watch your favorite TV shows or films, do you feel like you see characters that represent you or live a life that's relatable enough to make you want to see the work? And what do you expect that TV, media, and entertainment should be reflecting to you all?
Usually when I watch TV shows, I never really see a teenager who's like me, young Black female high schooler who's struggling with trying to find herself and her identity. And it's a real struggle to live in a specific area where you don't see people like you, where you watch on TV and go on social media, where you don't see people who look just like you. And then going on to like just walking around and not seeing like many people represent you. And then you go to like a specific area, like certain clubs that we have at our school where it's specifically made for Black people, people like Hispanic people, LGBTQ members who you can talk to and relate with. I think that that's a really good thing. And I think that we should have a lot more of that in TV shows, on social media. And it really shouldn't be questioned if you want to see someone who looks just like you, and it's easier to relate. It's easier to relate with, and it makes you feel better as a person. It makes you want to go out, do more, and then convince other people to come out and be themselves. And that way you get this rotation of everybody feeling good about themselves, which causes, it's a ripple effect of goodness. And I would love to see it.
Yeah,
Thank you, Zoe.
absolutely. Oh, to build off Zoe's point, I think it's also important that people want to see these diverse stories. Like, we are a part of the audience, and I feel like it's important that media reflects us in movies and TV shows. And when they're putting us in these shows, that they also see past tropes, that they don't just use us like for tokenism or just for the stereotypical character, but to genuinely share our stories and include us.
Thank you. Thank you. So this next question is kind of culture based and historical. So what culture and time periods do you all see highlighted most on TV? Does it feel authentic? And what do you want to see on TV as far as time periods? Do you want to see World War II? Do you want to see something about what happened in the 1500s in Africa? You know, what are you interested in?
I personally really like to see in like my film and like TV that I like watch, I like to see other like minorities experiences in other countries, because living in America, we get like it's Black versus white, but when you go to like different countries, it's like different races are like put against each other, or they have different experiences. And it's really interesting to see how someone just on a different continent like grew up and like what they learned from who was around them.
So what would make you more interested in, you know, historical eras, African American stories, you know, the Underground Railroad, Civil Rights Movement, even Jim Crow and Reconstruction, although some of those were, you know, more dark areas or eras, there was still love and light there. You know, we all come from these past generations. So what do you all think?
I think I always invite like news stories around Black history because I just love Black history so much and learning about it. But I definitely think I tend to tread cautiously when I think about the darker films shared about Black history, such as, I wouldn't call this, it is a historic film, something like 12 Years a Slave. something like The Color Purple, those types of films where first you have to wonder, who did you make this for? Because it's sort of more traumatizing than uplifting. And I definitely would be more open to maybe a more uplifting point of view on sort of stories, but I also am not a historian. So I think maintaining elements of truth to history is also important. So I'm sort of in the middle right now.
And to build up Rio's point, I also think like if they're going to show these more historic films, that they show how those facts still relay today. How like these 1960 films, or these historical events that were happening before, a lot of them affect our today's world. So sort of showing that connection is also really important.
Yeah, I also think going off of what Annie said, I think we like to think that these issues are so far removed from us, like, oh, what Martin Luther King did or what Malcolm X was, speaking about just was happening at that time and it doesn't relate to us now. But I think when we're able to make that connection, it makes it easier to understand how the world works now and how we approach those issues and problems that affect us in society.
And to build off of what Anastasia said, with Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, they're not that far from the time here we are now. And people don't realize that the timestamp from when Martin Luther King made his impact and to his murder to the George Floyd and the Ahmaud Arbery and the public lynchings that are going on today, they're not that far apart. And people are completely disconnected to that point that other people are trying to make.
Thank you. Thank you. So we're talking about perspective and whatnot. So this question is for Chelsea. How have your studies changed your perspective on the world? And what do you believe the future looks like for women politically and across education? I know that's a loaded question.
Well, I think we've already touched on this, but the opportunities are boundless. They're growing and they won't stop growing because we continue to push and we continue to make the change. I really think that there is much more opportunity for women in education to really expand their abilities. I feel privileged to have received an education that focused so much on diversity and inclusion and being just being a representative and a force to side with minorities, people of color, people who aren't like me but are like me. I think it's very special that we see these intersections coming together and we're able to celebrate them and acknowledge them. And yeah, I truly think that today where we're going, there's no stopping us. We are pushing and we're going to change the status quo. We already are changing it. And I have no reason to believe that that's going to slow down and we're going to stop because we have so much more progress to make.
Thank you. So Saigon, earlier you talked about data, and I want to talk about where do we find this data and how do we utilize it? Because you mentioned things like representation or students needing that representation in the classroom. Someone else might take that as an emotional perspective, like, oh, well, you just feel that way, but it doesn't necessarily actually make a difference. Where do we find the data that supports that it does make a difference? And how can students and parents and educators utilize this data and take it to leaders to show that it does matter?
Well, usually data is right in the budget. I mean, most agencies have to have transparency. It's just by law. They have to have their budget and their numbers and their data represented on their website. And that's just from a bigger standpoint. But what you can do if you're, I mean, whether you're a journalist or not, is to file a Freedom of Information Act, a FOIA, on your own, with whatever government entity that you, I mean, there's templates online. You just type in Freedom of Information Act, and they will give you a template and you have to request on what things you may need. If it's not obviously apparent on the website. So you can actually request specific data that you're looking for. And you can ask them how you want that data sorted, whether you want them to sort it in an Excel sheet or you can do it yourself. And there are laws between HIPAA and FERPA and all of this stuff between health and education. So knowing what you can and cannot obtain, names and stuff is probably going to be really hard to pull, especially for students and in education sector and in the hospital sector. But thank you for sharing that. But things like that, you have to use data because in corporate America, numbers talk, right? We want to know what we're doing works, what we're doing may or may not work. So numbers are everything in corporate America and just in general within your careers. That's going to be really important. How can you measure those outcomes and what's working and what's not working? So I guess the best thing to say is, from an education standpoint, depends on what you're looking for. I am more than willing to always meet with you all outside of this. If you want, hey, I have a question about how can I get this data, if it's pertaining to education or things like that. But organizations should have that apparent on their website. That's just for the sake of transparency. And if they don't, you can definitely request things like that. If you want to say, hey, this is where the numbers are going. Trying to think what else. It's been a while since I've reported on education, but sometimes you just have to show people where the disparities lie. And data will always tell you that. I mean, if you know how to sort it, if you can think about it from a conceptualized point, instead of saying, oh my gosh, there's just a bunch of Excel numbers, a bunch of numbers on this Excel sheet, you can sort that. You know, one of the biggest things that I did in Louisiana, I was able to look at data. And the best way I was able to obtain this data was going into the community and working with religious leaders and a coalition of organizations that were looking at data and tax exemption for large corporations in Louisiana. It's an industrial state, so they have a lot of industrial warehouses and things that go down there. And figuring out that they were getting free rides to the state. A state program was not holding them accountable. So for years and years, these large corporations were moving to Louisiana and not having to pay taxes. So when they don't have to pay taxes, that doesn't funnel back into local municipalities. So I was able to uncover through data that it was like over $1 million over the course of 2 years was supposed to go back into preschool. It did not, because no one was holding that program, that state program, accountable. And you know, these are just numbers that there are people and researchers that are really looking at the numbers, and just knowing who they are. That's key. But it's not very hard. I think you have to start with the data with everything. You have to. I think it's very important. I mean, even with the Harriet, like all that comes from data, and data doesn't have to look like numbers. It looks like written stories, testimonials, diaries, just anything like that. That is data that you can use to craft your narrative. I hope that answers your question. That's kind of a broad question, but if you are looking for specific data, you should definitely put in a FOIA request. And then there's other journalists that can help you. Okay, maybe you can access this. It follows the same exact template. And most government agencies have up to 3 days to respond to you, whether it's a digital format or if you need printed format. So that's what you're looking for. You can do that to you can even do it to corporations as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, you're
That
welcome.
definitely answers the question, because I think sometimes it's just important to look at, how do we really quantify certain things, or how do we, prove ourselves in a way? And as you said, the data is always going to do that. Dr. Larsen, as a historian, you see how historical data does that. So if you have any commentary, I am glad for it. And we have some more questions as well.
I'd love to follow up on that, because the data, whether it's numbers or documents, but you should always question the source of that data and documents. Just, make sure it's accurate, and who wrote it, who input that information, because not everybody is honest, not everybody, or they're telling it from their own perspective. So look for the gaps, look for what might be missing, trust your instinct. And also sometimes you have to check yourself when you're looking at the documents. You have to, kind of distance yourself so you can see the larger picture. But question everything you see, everything. Sometimes it isn't quite the way you think it is. It turns out to be something entirely different.
Great point. You have to question everything. I mean, it's when you look at data, you have to be cynical in a sense. And not cynical in a really, really bad way, but you have to say, why are they putting this out? If it's obviously on the website or things like that, who are the authors of it, right? Why do they put this together? What story are they trying to convey or not convey? And you have to ask for all of it because they'll give you a bunch of data and it might look confusing. And then you see that as well when you think about the body cam situations. There are so many exemptions. You can request a body cam footage from an incident, but they're going to come back with at least 7 or 8 topics of why they've taken this out of it or why they've cut it and stuff. So that's like something that journalists really, really struggle with because you never get the full video. They have to cut it if someone's deceased in it, or if there's a child in it, or if there's something that could be incriminating to them. They cut that out of those body cam footages. That's why they don't. So these are just something to think about. When you see this stuff, just think about, they had a FOIA request this to get this footage, and people it's public relations. They have to protect their agencies. So yeah, she's absolutely correct. You have to look at things with a very critical eye. Just because it seems like it's easy to get it, doesn't mean it's always accurate. Yeah.
Thank you. One thing that I want our youth to, notice that Dr. Larsen and Sagan are bringing opportunities for representation, and Chelsea as well, in gender studies and education. What we're doing is, creating an opportunity for us to know what is out there. What, fields do you have the opportunity to represent yourself in and to be a part of? So our next question, I think that our teenagers probably will have some excitement to answer this question. So how has TV and social media affected you, and do you feel like you're expected to live up to influencer-like realities? And after this question, we're going to go into a little segment about STEM, and then we'll get back into our panel. And Brielle, I'm going to pick on you a little bit just because I am curious in your response to this, and then anyone else, when she's all done, you just jump on in.
Okay. I feel like in the Black community, especially as a Black girl, there's like a certain type of influencer style. Like there's this idea of just being perfect and presenting all of the time. You have to be Black excellence, which is like being gifted either academically or physically. You have to look amazing at all times. Your edges have to be laid. You always have to have your hair done and did. Your outfits always have to be amazing, or else you are not really accepted into majority of cultures or any type of mainstream media. And I definitely think that that's a pressure that I feel, is like you always have to be your best and look your best at all times.
Yeah, and to build on Brielle's point, I feel like with social media primarily, your following is really based off of just like the energy you can kind of bring to the screen, how you look physically, and not as much of your character. So you see a lot of pressure to create this perfect online persona like Brielle was talking about, when in reality, it's not really an accurate depiction of what that person is like in real life. It's just them on the internet. So yeah, there's a lot of critical thinking, like we were talking about earlier, figuring out if this person is real, like trying to decipher real from fake with social media.
And I think going on Annie's point, like the influencer lifestyle only presents like one side, because after you post that picture on Instagram or on TikTok, you still have your life outside of that. And I think we don't see the mental health issues that the influencers are going through. And I feel like as people who follow these influencers and who question themselves like, oh, am I good enough? These influencers aren't, posting about like encouraging like thoughts and like, hey, your mental health is important. It's just like, look the best, look the part, and everything will be okay. But we also have to acknowledge the stuff that goes on behind the camera.
Thank you.
Oh.
So go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I wanted to add a quick point to what Camilla said. Like, so with this pressure to be this perfect person online, how it also sort of allows for rapid appropriation because people are following trends. And when you see TikTok a lot, how a lot of the popular dances are based off of Black culture and dances that Black creators made first, and then white creators will capitalize off of that, trying to follow the trend and make the biggest following as possible. That's something different that we see in our generation that hasn't been there previously.
Yes, sorry, just one point to go off of what Annie said. I noticed personally that there's like the use of Ebonics and like the AAVE. Like when I go to to a friend, one of my Black friends, and I go, period, sis. There's people, specifically a few white people, who will take that and bump it up like to the second degree, and they'll use it like it's a trend or like it's cool to use when that's not necessarily what it is. And then they flip it and then they turn it into a trend, and then other people do it and then it gets completely flipped, and it's not it's just not the same. And it's like it makes me uncomfortable. It makes me really uncomfortable because how I talk shouldn't be turned into, oh my gosh, look at the new slang. It's not that. This isn't that.
Can I just follow up on that? I got a request this past week. I do a lot of consulting, and this company makes video games, virtual reality and augmented reality video games. And they're doing one that involves Harriet Tubman. And they asked me to translate their script into AAVE. And I said, no. I'm like, so I don't know if that was the right response, but I'm like, why do they need to do that? I was very curious. It was a company out of Montreal, Canada. And it shocked me. It really shocked me. I've never had a request like that before.
Well, Dr. Larsen, that leads us perfectly into our next question, actually. I've heard some comments I think that would kind of lead ultimately to cultural appropriation, language, things like that. So for yourself, we look at glamorous roles such as acting, directing, producing, but how do you become something like a consultant, and what difference does it make to have, accurate representation like young Black women or young Black men or, different demographics in those roles to be able to tell the stories accurately?
So for me, I'm hired on these films and documentaries because I'm a subject expert on that particular period of time or that historical character. But the directors and the producers and the teams, they're the ones that make all those choices about who do they hire as the actors, and what kind of language are they going to use and things like that. I have no role in that whatsoever. My concern is, like on the Harriet script, how accurate was it? We fought and argued a few times, and and usually, well, sometimes I won, sometimes Hollywood won, and they would fudge some of the facts, but they wanted to make it authentic. So I'd like to think that happens in a lot of instances, but I'm not so sure. You probably all have different opinions about that. So as far as my consulting, I'm only as the content expert, not all the other visual stuff that you're going to see and the people that are hired. Yeah.
I think it's a great representation though for this young demographic to understand that you can become an expert, and people will look to you for your expertise if you have taken the effort and the time to really master something. So speaking of mastering things, creating things, we're going to take a short segment to speak with Annie and Anastasia about a STEM toolkit that they've created, and also an organization that they've started, so that we can kind of, get some examples of how we can be better representations or better representatives, excuse me, of ourselves. So Annie and Anastasia, if you all could stay on camera with us, and we'll just get started and talk to us a little bit about
Brielle
your
too.
Okay,
Brielle's
okay.
also in it.
Yes. All right. Everyone who's a part, stay on, and we'll just talk for a few moments, and then we'll get to a little question and answer. So if you all could just tell us a little bit about the name of your organization, what it is, the purpose, and yeah.
Yeah, so we are all part of the organization called Fairfield for Change, which is a student-led diversity committee that advocates for different initiatives within the Fairfield City School District. So we do a lot of work to spread awareness of local Native tribes, also bring more inclusive programming and education, and just overall find ways to foster a more accepting community at Fairfield.
Thank you. And what drew you all to do that, and how did you go about creating the group?
So I would say it was after the protest, I think it was 2020, George Floyd's death. I think we all came to a realization that there was something lacking in our school, and there was like a lack of conversations being held. So when we created the group, basically, we just wanted to make our voices heard and make, our petitions made to like administration, so we could just tell them about our concerns in our school. And then through that, we just started, advocating for more groups and more things that we noticed in the school that we probably didn't notice before. But we just started from there.
I would like to second what she said, because it didn't just come from like one event. I think George Floyd's murder was like the tipping point for us and what we wanted to do in our school. And we had been at our school district for so long that we already knew all of the problems that we wanted to address and get down to. So I definitely think George Floyd's murder was sort of like the icing on the cake that made it sort of like fall over.
Thank you. Thank you. I ask you all these things because, of course, we may have some students or parents or educators here with us who want to take that step, for their school, for their neighborhood, maybe at their job, just to really talk about how we can represent ourselves, what that looks like, what steps we need to take. So there's also an activism toolkit, right, that has been created. So what was the process for that, and what was the purpose?
Oh, yeah. So I created an activism toolkit over summer vacation with this program called Girls Who Code. And it was to spread awareness of diverse representation in media. Growing up, I always saw a lack of Black characters, and I wanted to really deep dive into why that was and see what I could do to make a change. And so I created this activism toolkit, which functioned basically as a website to show the progression of Black representation in film, starting from like racist minstrel shows to now with like Jordan Peele and more Black characters being the main leads. And yeah, through that project, I also learned about the importance of having diverse representation in STEM primarily, where we have so much more technology emerging, but the people that are in the rooms making this tech all look the same. So we're trying to make products that a vast, like very diverse community can use. So making sure that we're having the people in the labs, the people that are making this tech, be representative of the people that will be using the technology. Yeah, so that's something that I really explored over summer, and I'm still really interested in.
Thank you. Thank you. You all spoke on doing some work on local tribes. What tribes are you all working on? Is this in what communities?
I can take this one really quick, and Anastasia and Brielle can jump in as well. But we were looking at the tribes in the 45011 and 45014 zip codes, which is where our school district is founded, or our schools are located in. And we were trying to highlight the tribes that exist here, increase visibility, especially since Fairfield has an Indian mascot. trying to uncover those cultural insensitivities and start a healing process, see how we can transition from the old Native mascot into something that's more inclusive. But while we're getting to that location, how can we amplify Native voices and really spread awareness of that culture that's here?
Thank you, thank you. So I really wanted to, touch on that element of Native American life and Indigenous history. I think that, of course, in the state of Ohio, there's a great amount of Indigenous and Native American history here. So I really commend you all for doing that work, and anyone who is interested in some of the work that's being done, at least for Fearful for Change, there is some information on the side on our comment section for our viewers, on our panelists, on many of the things that we've been talking about here today. So take a look in the comment section if you're interested in, following up on some of the things that you learned about today. So if you all don't have any more information to share about your group, we're going to get back to our panel portion. I really appreciate you all bringing information about this group to us, because like I said, you all are really being leaders, of your community, and leaders of everything that you're doing, because people can look to you and see a blueprint on where to begin. Annie, did you have a question or anything?
Yeah, just as a closing remark, like, we're really interested in partnering with different people in the community. We currently just finished a land acknowledgement statement, and we partnered with a local foundation on a grant so we could install plaques with the land acknowledgement statement in all of the schools in our district. So we really love partnering with community members and finding more ways that we can spread this message. So yeah, feel free to reach out, and we would love to connect with you all.
Thank you, thank you. I know that, mascots and representation of certain figures has been a big topic among education for, quite some years now. So like I said, these young ladies are really setting the tone on how to do your research and make change where you can. So leading back into our panel, I had a question for Dr. Larsen. So we've talked about representation, we've talked about some of these historical figures. So could you tell us a little bit about Fannie Lou Hamer and why she's so important to the civil rights movement compared to, someone who we might know as a very popular figure like MLK or Rosa Parks?
So Fannie Lou Hamer was a civil rights activist, Mississippi sharecropper during the 1960s, and she came out of the middle of the Mississippi Delta. She was not an elite. She had a 6th grade education, but she took on the world. And as a result of certain things that happened to her, she decided to challenge the status quo and really moved people and helped change the country. And I think her story is important because she was such an ordinary person who did extraordinary things. That, we have ordinary people in our communities today who are doing extraordinary things or could do them if we support them and help them navigate, or we all navigate as a community together. This is what she did. She wasn't an elite person like Martin Luther King and a lot of the people around him. She was from like the soil of Mississippi, and she could change the world because she used her voice, she used her passion, she used her truth. And some people didn't like that. Some of MLK's colleagues did not like her because she wasn't well educated. Her clothes were not fashionable. She had that deep Mississippi drawl, and they were embarrassed by her. But boy, did she touch the lives of millions of people because she spoke an authenticity that MLK and others like him could not speak to. So that's why her story is important, because there are Fannie Lou Hamers today in our communities. And we all don't have to reinvent the wheel when it comes to fighting for civil rights, because a lot of things that were used before we can use again. And as an older person, to tell older people like me that we need to support young people like you because you are the energy. Absolutely. And Fannie Lou Hamer saw that in the people like John Lewis and Robert Moses, who were part of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. She mentored them and they mentored her. So we have to allow that in our lives today and carry on this fight because we're not done fighting, clearly.
Thank you. Speaking of fighting and change, before we get into our question and answer segment, I had a question for Chelsea. So how would you say women have been, marginalized throughout U.S. history? What's your favorite time period throughout U.S. history for women?
That's a great question. So I love to always start with Declaration of Independence. Everybody's created equal, all men in particular, but at the time, only white men with property could vote. They were the only people that mattered. Their voices were the ones that mattered. So over time, these changes that were being made to the legal representation and giving voices to people who haven't been historically given a voice is what has really made the change. The suffrage movement, of course, is some place that I always like to look at. And I like to look at the origins of the suffrage movement with the law of coverture, which basically, when you were born, you were your father's name, and then whenever you got married, you transferred his basic ownership to your husband. That's why you took his name. So looking at how those affected women and how them not having a voice in Congress and in these larger scale places of change, how that really restricted them from being able to control their bodies, being able to control their lives. And so we see back in the 1890s, looking at the age of consent and how in, I believe it was like 38 states, how the law of consent was 12 and under. Delaware, it was the age of 7, girls could consent to sexual relations. And seeing how that was used as a tool to control women's bodies, and seeing after the Civil War how sex was used as a tool against Black women in particular to control their body and assert white supremacy. Ideas like this where women have been devoid of the power to make the change because white men just haven't wanted them to historically. They want to maintain the power. I think all areas, especially I focus on American history, have these little acts of resistance of everyday people that are especially interesting to me, where it's not this mass John Brown or Nat Turner revolt, but it's these little everyday pieces of resisting and saying, no, I'm not going to do that. That's not how it's going to be. Or even navigating against it. I think those are very important to acknowledge. And by bringing attention to these marginalizations through history, we can start to realize that we now have the power to change these. And we've been working to change them. I mean, we just celebrated the 100th anniversary of the passing of the suffrage amendment, 19th Amendment in 1920. So it's really great to have these milestones and these markers to remember where we came from and where we still have to go.
Thank you. Thank you. So once again, we talk about being an expert. All of these ladies that are with us today, Dr. Larsen, Chelsea, Sagan, have really showed us, how we can be leaders when we have, an expertise of our industry or our field. And I want to ask today, Dr. Larsen, we kind of touched on this a little bit already, but how do students get involved with this historical work, and how do they, represent themselves in a way that can really yield change in media? We talked about it in journalism, but let's talk about the entertainment sector.
So I think that Cozad was saying that you have to become an expert in something, but the only way you can do that is either through study, internships, taking classes and courses to see if there's an area that you have passion for. Always look for a place where you can have passion, because doing work is boring and awful, and you don't want to do it if you don't have passion for it. So find that passion and learn as much as you can, talk to people. I'm a big advocate for internships and getting, if you're interested in history, if you can get a job with as a summer employee or an internship with the National Park Service or state park or a local park or the Historical Society, and also tourism offices. You want to celebrate stories in your community, reach out to your county or local tourism office or the state tourism office and ask for their help, ask for funding. You want to put up a sign, go to county board meetings or city council meetings and say, we want to celebrate this history. We can write this and make the community aware of this moment in time or this neighborhood or this story. So tourism, there's a lot of money in tourism. That's non-traditional, but it's becoming more and more traditional. It's public history. So I encourage you to look at those opportunities for yourself. It'll take you in many different directions, and be flexible, always be flexible.
Thank you. Thank you. We have a question in the audience, and it's also it's almost in alignment with this idea of how do we market certain things? We talked about historical markers. We talked about plaques earlier. These are things that are typically found outdoors. And we have a question in the audience from Jeremy for the youth. He said, I work for a local nature center, and I'm curious about the role of nature in your lives, specifically how accessible nature feels to you and how you feel organizations like mine can be an ally when it comes to better access to nature. We have any outdoorsy students here? Okay, Kendall?
I would love to answer that question. Over the summer, I actually work at a summer camp, and I work on a farm with like a lot of kids. Some of the kids are like from really rich private schools, but other of the kids are like from schools and areas that don't have access to like outdoorsy and nature things. And it's really interesting to be able to take these kids outside and let them explore. But one thing I've noticed like working there is that I have a love for nature, which I didn't really know I had. And it's really hard to get my friends to have a love for nature. They do not like it. People my age are so against going outside and hiking. I find it really hard to find people my age who like to actually spend time outside. But I feel like that's just because they were not exposed to it at a young age. And it's not that it's not around. Like there's a bunch of parks, like so many parks, but I feel like it's really hard to find real nature, especially living in like the suburbs. It's like there's a park, but it's like just mulch and stuff and a couple of trees. But to me, real nature is like the forest and the woods. And I think that I wish schools really push that more, like going on field trips outside more, because I wish I had more of an opportunity to figure out that how much I love nature.
And like, I am the same. I really love nature. I actually wrote one of my college essays about it. And something like my favorite park is Harbin Park because it has this like beautiful scenic overlook and it tends to be quieter and all of that stuff. And like as Kendall said, most parks around here, because I do live in the suburbs, they're like playgrounds. And so you're just gonna get a lot of kids screaming, running around. And like if you can consider kids nature, then like sure. But I think that because Harbin Park is 30 minutes away, and so that's like an hour of driving from the park back to my home. So I think connecting maybe students with smaller areas, more exclusive and secluded areas would be something that's really appreciated.
Thank you. So I had a comment comment earlier. It talked about you all should do a data project with your peers about what goes on behind the camera. So for our young people, do you feel like social media has allowed you to come together more easily with people, of the same age or of the same interest as you, or does it kind of just seem like a good idea, but not necessarily the most effective?
I think that it's not the most acceptive of people. It has its moments where there are times where people can easily come together, but at the same time, there are people who will like change will like put on a front in front of the camera for like a period of time, and then people try to adapt their own bodies in dangerous ways to try to fit that narrative of, oh, I'm supposed to have a certain facial structure, my eyebrows are supposed to be looking this way, edges are supposed to be laid, but at the same time, that's not how you're supposed to be 24/7, because you only take like 7 pictures, but behind the screen, you're like living your life as you would normally do, but not on a camera screen. Like you're not in front of a camera 24/7. And I think the positives of social media and things like that is where people have like really good support systems on social media. Like if you feel like really nice about yourself, or you like look really nice in an outfit and you post a picture, you get all the comments of, oh my God, you look amazing. And it's like the fit, it's everybody like coming together to support you. And I think that's like one of the great benefits of social media and that platform. So I think that it has its moments of coming together and dividing. It's, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Also to build off what Zoe said, I think the conversations are being had, but they're being had in very like small ways. I would like refer to TikTok, like in the comment sections when somebody says something and it'll reply to their comment, and it'll just be a whole thread of comments and everybody agrees or disagrees on a comment, and the conversation happens there. But when it comes to conversations where like it happens in person or it needs to happen in person, nobody really wants to have it, because that means they would have to be in person with the other person and have to look at their face and actually listen to them instead of being behind the screen or being behind the computer and, you know, typing. It kind of makes it easier to have the conversation when you're behind the camera or the phone. But I also think the conversations are being had in like family settings or friend settings. And I think we need to open it up to like a wider array. And I think it's just better if we do that.
I know I'm not a student. I'll go, sorry, Asia. I was gonna say the reason why I had recommended that, just listening to you all talk about social media and the influence on it, and looking at these projects and just giving you an idea of where data comes in, and these will be more testimonial data. Recently, I've just heard that a lot of young adults, teenagers, preteens are committing suicide at larger rates based off of social media and wanting to keep up with the next person and not getting enough likes. And, you know, what's really behind, when I suggested what's behind the camera, because it's not reality, right? It's a highlight reel. People post their best photos or whatever makes them happy in that moment, but that might not be their reality. And I thought, you know, since you are primarily Fairfield students, you could do like a quick iPhone story. It's just you have great tools in your hand, and you can go around and interview people or some of the people that are the most popular through social media at your school and really get to know them. So that's what one way of being a part of the story and connecting with other local media platforms for that. I know it's a big lift. I know everyone's busy in their life, but had I had these ideas in high school, like these things take off. People have documentaries, you can get grant funding for it, because people really want to know what it's like to be a high school student now. In social media, it is a scary world. I'm only 29, but telling you what, ours took off toward the ends of my 20s when everything just became so much more of an influence. So just a project idea, and you can run data. The data are the students, and then you can incorporate the local data or the macro level data to tell that story from a student's perspective. Just a short documentary or series that you could do about people that you actually know on a day-to-day basis and what they have to deal with, because I feel like mental health is a big deal as well. And that's starting to become such, it's not taboo anymore. People understand that people need sick days. People need mental health days, and you don't know what everyone's going through. So I just feel like that's just a project that you could work on over this, or just any time, right? That uses data, more of a macro idea, and localizes it in a micro setting. So just something to think about if you have any projects or things coming up or anything like that. I just think it's a great idea. I mean, you have a lot of ideas. I love the tribes. I love, you know, bringing that idea to life because it's not talked about a lot, at least not from where I've been around. But yeah, these are just little projects that can really take off for you. Yeah, for sure.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. So
Yeah.
we're nearing our closing time, but I wanted to make an announcement to everyone here today. So the Freedom Center will be hosting a student scholarship. It will be a video contest, and that will be taking place soon. So keep an eye out on our website for an application and details on how to apply for that, because I know we have plenty of seniors here. We also have some young ladies who are approaching their senior year. So of course, we want to make sure that we can get you all funded. This is a perfect opportunity for you all to, like I said, take a look in those comments and see how you can represent yourself, your community, your school, see who you can get familiar with and networked with, people who have familiar and common interests as you and common goals for our community. So I want to say thank you again to all of our wonderful panelists, to you young ladies. I know that there were some young men interested, but ladies just got in first. So I'm very appreciative for everyone who was interested in this program. Keep up with our virtual programs, our youth programs. We're always looking for young people to be a part. And like I said, check those resources, Greater Cincinnati Foundation, All In. All of those places are perfect opportunities for us to get involved and engaged. And of course, Dr. Larsen's books are for sale if you want to become an expert on this historical era. So you all have a wonderful Saturday. This program is recorded, so we will be posting it online for us to share. So thank you again to everyone and have a wonderful evening.